Hey guys, tonight we step into a smoke-filled hut on a misty medieval morning, where a healer's chant echoes against thatched walls as you try not to gag at the pungent blend of nettle poultices and crushed bones. You can almost feel damp straw pressing cold against your toes. Hear the distant toll of the church bell mixing with the hiss of a simmering brew. You probably won't survive this unfiltered stroll through centuries-old superstition without at least a mental shudder. But that's part of the charm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see who's drifting off with us. Damn. Lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a frost-laced village, green toward an earthen hut wreathed in smoky incense, senses alert to every creak of weathered planks. Inside, a hunched figure mutters fragments of Latin prayers, scattering salt and tiny bones over a fevered child's brow. Herbal pouches hang from rafters mugwort for dreams. Vervain against venom while a battered wooden table bears iron scalpels, rudimentary forceps, and a clay jar of crushed mandrake. This is the dawn of healing faith and folklore, where whispered spells intertwine with the scrape of metal on flesh. Historians still argue whether these incantations offered real psychological relief or served purely as ritual theater. You lean in to watch a crude cauterization. A heated poker hisses as it meets raw skin, steam curling upward like ghostly tendrils. While this may seem barbaric now, mainstream accounts show that early cautery sometimes reduced infection risks better than leaving wounds open to filthy straw and unwashed hands. Yet the line between treatment and torture often blurred, and desperate peasants clutched amulets to ward off imagined demons as much as rotting flesh. A crusty old woman sits by the hearth, grinding blackened toadskins into powder. She swears that wearing a small sachet of it around your neck will chase away plague-bearing spirits. It's one of the more peculiar fringe tidbits you'll encounter in your travels. The toadshell charm rattles like broken teeth, promising protection, even as scholars debate its actual efficacy. Historians still argue whether such talismans offered genuine placebo comfort or merely exploited people's fear under the guise of folk wisdom. The crackle of embers under the hearth's pot is oddly soothing, and you inhale the smoky steam as if it might grant you clairvoyance. In reality, most early medieval physicians had no formal training. Healing duties often fell to local clergy or wandering healers who learned from mothers and grandmothers, not universities. Yet some records mention that pilgrimages too. Saintly relics like St. Martin's tomb in Tours drew huge crowds seeking miracles, suggesting that faith could sometimes rival any surgeon's blade. As you step outside into the chill dawn, the hut's ember glow fades behind you, leaving you with lingering questions. Can a whispered prayer in an alien tongue heal a fevered brow? Does clutching a charmed stone calm your pounding heart? Do you feel the weight of both skepticism and wonder pressing on your shoulders? The road ahead will wind through monasteries preserving faded herbals, barber surgeons daring to sever limbs, and rogue quacks peddling elixirs that shimmer like treacherous promises. And remember that cracked jar of crocodile dung they rubbed on sunburn? There's more where that came from. You wander along a moss-clawed path until the rising sun slants through ancient oaks, illuminating the crenellated walls of a monastery where healing and holiness intertwine. The stone archway groans as you pass beneath it, stepping into a shadowed courtyard flanked by herb gardens, valerian, comfrey, and wormwood leaves glistening with dew. Inside, the low murmur of Gregorian chant drifts from the chapel into the scriptorium, mingling with the faint scratch of quills. Monastic communities, especially Benedictines, maintained infirmaries and scriptoria, where they meticulously copied classical texts and cultivated healing gardens, preserving medical knowledge long after the Roman Empire fell. Historians still argue whether prayers, power, or botanical ingredients accounted for the greatest miracles of monastic medicine. You slip into the scriptorium, where long rows of monks lean over oaken desks. Parchment, so thin you can almost taste the chalky grain, lies beneath their steady hands as they transcribe Dioscorides' De Materia Medica and Galen's anatomical treatises. The flicker of tallow candles casts dancing shadows across illuminated capitals and marginalia. One monk, clearly bored by Latin declensions, sketched a tiny basilisk winding through the border of a herbal entry. Proof that medieval scribes sometimes expressed more interest in mythical creatures than migraine. Remedies. This marginal doodle is a quirky reminder that even austere men of faith occasionally craved creative release beyond the hush of the scriptorium. You follow a narrow corridor to the infirmary, known as the convalescarium. Kindly brother dips a wooden spoon into a steaming bowl of barley gruel, sweetened with honey and rosewater. A faint aroma of lavender and horehound lingers, an intentional antiseptic barrier to ward off rot and pestilence. On a low table rests a small phial labeled Unicornis corni pulvis, a prized powder of narwhal tusk, masquerading as mythical horn. Medieval pharmacists swore it could detoxify blood and cure epilepsy, and extravagant fringe belief that sold for more than its weight in silver. Historians still argue whether such exotic ingredients had placebo effects so potent they rivaled genuine cures. You inhale the earthy scent of crushed leaves as you approach a shelf lined with glass jars. One bears a yellowish residue called mummy powder, purportedly ground from Egyptian mummies and used to staunch bleeding. The notion of pulverized human remains as medicine seems macabre now, but it was mainstream practice in later medieval centuries. As you touch a vial, it clinks lightly, reminding you of that cracked jar of crocodile dung from the village healer. Both illustrate how desperation drove people to swallow or rub on something, anything, in the quest for health. A sudden clatter draws your gaze to a younger monk bustling to tend a new arrival. A feverish farmer draped in a coarse wool tunic. The brother wraps a mustard poultice around the man's chest, whispering an Ave Maria between pinches of mustard seeds and heated clay. He urges the patient to repeat a prayer for Saint Blaise, patron against throat ailments. The blend of herbal therapy and spiritual invocation underlines a broader debate. Historians still argue whether divine intercession or empirical practice played the leading role in monastic care. Yet, many records attest that patients often improved simply by resting in a clean bed. Luxury enough compared to filthy village homes. Through an arched window, you glimpse the infirmary garden, laid out in neat beds forming a cruciform pattern. Here monks cultivate meadowsweet for pain relief, bettini for headaches, and scordium for wounds. The periodic clank of iron gates signals the arrival of pilgrims seeking miraculous cures at the shrine of a saint, sometimes more drawn by hope. Then herbals. You press your palm against the cool stone wall, feeling its reassuring solidity. A gentle tease crosses your mind. At least these healers didn't charge you for readings of your humoral chart. Just a few prayers and a slice of gruel. The hush of evening descends as candles are replenished, their flame scent shifting from tallow to perfumed oils. You sit on a battered wooden bench by a single lantern's glow, contemplating centuries of accumulated wisdom and eccentric lore. The scent of warmed beeswax and vellum envelopes you, carrying a promise of safety in this cloistered retreat. Yet you recall that outside these walls, barber surgeons await with razors drawn, and quacks peddle elixirs of dubious origin. You pause, acknowledging that monastic medicine preserved precious knowledge but rarely strayed far from the twin pillars of faith and tradition. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on spirituality hindered or helped the rise of empirical practices. A final bell tolls, its deep resonance vibrating through cloister arches. You rise, brushing flecks of straw from your robe, and step once more into the courtyard, where dew has turned to mist. The pungent aroma of wormwood drifts on, the cool air mingling with memory of chalky manuscripts and the distant echo of chants. As you walk away, you realize these silent, candlelit halls served as both sanctuary for the sick and cradle for the seeds of later medical revolutions. Ahead lies the street where the barber-surgeon's striped pole will beckon leechcraft and bloodletting await. But for a moment, you carry the quiet confidence of monastic healers whose careful preservation of texts would one day light the way toward a more empirical future. You cross a dusty lane and pause before the barber-surgeon's shop, its redand white striped pole spinning lazily in the breeze, a vivid beacon that once proclaimed both haircuts and bloodletting. Swinging the door open, you step into a cramped, dimly lit room awash in the temps of iron and curing salves. The wooden floorboards creak beneath your boots, and your eyes dart over the array of tools, gleaming lancets, forceps with serrated edges, and a leather-bound basin stained dark with old congealed blood. You can't help but shiver at the thought of what each instrument has witnessed. Historians still argue whether these barber-surgeons did more harm than good. But there's no denying their ubiquity in medieval towns. A hulking man in a striped apron, his uniform a curious mirror of the pole outside, beckons you forward. He glances at a chart hanging on the wall that diagrams the human body segmented into zones for bleeding, mapped in crude ink, sometimes called the vein man. This chart guided where to lance a vein to restore humoral balance, according to Galenic theory. A mainline historical fact. Medieval practitioners believed disease arose from an excess of blood, phlegm, black bile, or yellow bile, and that bleeding could purge the harmful surplus. You settle onto a wooden stool as he wraps a rough linen band around your arm. The linen smells faintly of herb-infused vinegar, an attempt to reduce infection, though antiseptic science lay centuries away. With a practiced flick, he slices your vein. Crimson life seeps into the waiting bowl, dripping in rhythmic pulses like sinister raindrops. The pain is sharp, but oddly grounding. As your vision dims around the edges, the barber murmurs repeating numbers of distinct lances, sometimes as many as 40 strikes for the gravest maladies. It's a ritual of suffering you apparently signed up for. On a nearby bench, an open wound is being treated more exotically. You lean in as he introduces you to a bizarre fringe practice, inserting live leeches into tiny incisions deep in the patient's forearm. The slimy creatures latch on, swelling to the size of grapes as they feast. Supposedly, they drained bad blood more gently, reducing complications. Leeches were imported from distant marshes, sold by the ounce, and prized enough to be worth more than fresh meat. Some villages even bred their own leeches in wooden tubs, an industry that persists quietly in a few pockets of Europe today. As the bleeding slows, you notice a pigeon perched on a windowsill, its feathers ruffled. It's not a pet, but part of another odd remedy. Barber surgeons sometimes applied pigeon blood to bleeding wounds to encourage clotting, a mainstream practice rooted in folk observations. You swallow a laugh at the thought of our modern hospitals ever keeping birds for bleeding-edge treatments. Historians still argue whether such animal-derived methods offered any real benefit. Beyond placebo and the obvious compression effect, the barber wipes the incision with a cloth soaked in a murky yellow liquid. This is galbanum resin, he explains, pulled from plant gum to staunch the flow. You catch the resinous scent of pine mixed with stale sweat. He ties a tight bandage around your arm, and you flex your hand, feeling the throbbing inside. It's all strangely satisfying, like a twisted spa day. Your attention shifts to a battered wooden shelf lined with oddities. Jars of bristled mushrooms believed to muffle fevers. Powdered dragon's blood sap touted to heal ulcers, and a small tin labeled serpent stone. Legend held that a smooth, sized pebble collected near viper nests could absorb venom when pressed to snakebite wounds, drawing out toxins. You pick it up. Surface is cool and unremarkable. It's a reminder of how intuition and myth intertwine to form these patchwork cures. A woman hobbles in, clutching her side. She's pale as parchment, fever flickering behind glazed eyes. The barber surgeon beckons her to lie on a low bench. He brandishes a small iron pyramid, glowing faintly from a hidden ember. Cooping a mainstream procedure will be next. He warms the cup until it hisses, then presses it to her back, creating a suction that reddens her skin and supposedly draws out hidden poisons. The hissing sound makes you jump, and a faint singe of barley straw wafts through the room, a cupping. Leaves patterned bruises, that bellied pride of a hardcore remedy, and some patients flaunted them like battle scars. Historians still argue whether cupping accelerated healing or merely displaced tension into new bruises. You notice a jar of powdered toad as you wander near the door, recalling the marginalia basilisk from the monastery scriptorium. The barber allows you to pour a pinch onto your palm. It looks like coarse sand, flecked with algae. Toad powder was believed to cure toothaches and remove tattoos. You couldn't help but imagine rubbing frog bones on your skin. It's gross, but somehow thrilling. You tuck the jar's label under your arm, perhaps a curiosity for future reference, or the basis of a modern cocktail party anecdote from outside. The bells of a nearby chapel ring noon, their echoes rolling across the town. The barber surgeon stands, brushing lint from his sleeve, and offers you a cup of thin ale to restore your strength. You sip it gratefully, surprised by its sour warmth. He leans in, voice lowering. Word is, some physicians still look down on us, but at least we're in the trenches. A cheeky quip, yet shrewdly honest. In many cities, the barbers formed a separate guild with its own regulations, while university-educated physicians remained aloof, wielding parchment licenses over practical skills. The rivalry shaped medical hierarchy for centuries. You rise, flexing your arm to gauge the tightness of the bandage. Your skin tingles, and there's a dull ache beneath your elbow, a reminder that even routine bleeding carries real risk. Yet, as you step back into the sunlight, a sense of grim satisfaction accompanies you. You've witnessed the paradox of barber surgeons, brutal in practice, yet often the only accessible healers for common folk. Their tools slice, scrape, and suction. But they also embody the medieval spirit of making do with what's at hand. Leaving the shop, you glance back at the iron tools gleaming in the window and wonder how many lives were saved or shortened by that very bloodletting basin. The sun warms your arm through your sleeve, and you rub the tender spot, recalling the gentle hiss of leached skin. Ahead lies an herbalist shop filled with jars and curiosities. Perhaps there you'll find remedies more plant-based and less sanguine. But for now, the echo of that barber's rasping blade lingers in your mind. A sharp reminder that healing has often danced on the edge of danger. You step into a cramped apothecary shop whose windows are smeared with years of herbal residue, transforming pale morning light into a mottled green glow. Shelves groan under the weight of dusty jars, some sealed with wax, others tied with fraying twine, each labeled in spidery Latin. The air is heavy with the aroma of dried roots and savory powders. A heady mix that makes you wonder if you've wandered into a tea lounge for witches. You breathe in deeply, and the scent of mandrake root earthy, musky, and faintly garlicky gives you a thrill. You probably won't randomly start screaming if you tug on one, unlike the legends, but don't test it. Harvesters claimed mandrakes. Scream could shatter eardrums. Historians still argue whether Mandragora's reputed magic did anything more than boost medieval marketers' bottom lines. Behind a wide oak counter, an herbalist with ink-stained fingers greets you. His apron is smudged with honey and pollen, and he swivels around to reveal a brass mortar and pestle gleaming in the dim light. He taps each jar as if checking for echoes, then lifts a heavy stone orb. Bezoar stone, he says, pronunciation, rattling like a secret code. Found in the gut of mountain goats, believed to neutralize any poison. You heft it. It's surprisingly heavy, warm from handling. It looks like a smooth river pebble, polished by centuries of faith. Medieval physicians listed bezoars among their most prized. Antidotes mainstream medicine recognized their use in royal courts, yet scholars still debate whether ingesting or crushing these stones offered any real immunity to toxins. You lean over the counter, eyeing a slender vial filled with opaque white powder. The herbalist rollers his finger over the label. Unicornis rotra, he announces triumphantly. Powdered narwhal tusk, though they called it unicorn horn. Guaranteed to cure epilepsy and reverse curses. You crack a smile, picturing a narwhal prancing through icy seas with a rainbow horn. In reality, narwhal tusk was a high-priced commodity smuggled from distant fjords and sold as mythical elixir. This fringe tidbit highlights how medieval Europeans blurred zoology with zoolo, and how fancy packaging could sell practically anything. Next, the herbalist uncorks a squat jar filled with dark, crumbly bits crocodile dung. You remember that? Dusty, cracked jar from the village healer's hut back on the green, who smeared it on sunburns and called it Egyptian magic. Here, it's touted as a remedy for plague, sores, and festering wounds. The herbalist wiggles a piece out with silver tongs, placing it on a scrap of parchment. It smells sharp and bitter, like burnt coffee grounds left out in the rain. You can't fathom rubbing it on open skin, but you tuck the parchment into your pocket. Partly as proof you survived this aisle, partly out of perverse fascination. The herbalist gestures to a low shelf lined with little bottles of green, black, and red oils. This one's spiderweb balm, he says, sweeping a bony finger across a thick, gray paste, collected from church attics and dried over embers. Folks swore it staunched bleeding, though whether it worked or just scared folks into standing still is anybody's guess. A light joke flickers in your mind. Next time you cut your finger, why not dab a little attic dust? Yet you note this practice's ingenuity. Spider silk does have a certain tensile strength, and scholars still argue whether its protein content might have aided clotting. You wander deeper, squinting at a line of glass vials shimmering with liquids that catch stray beams of light. One holds melrosarum, rosewater infused with honey and crushed violet petals, reputed to soothe inflamed throats. Smells like walking through a dewy garden at dawn, comforting, almost healing on its own. Another vial contains oleum. Hippocastani, made from horse chestnut seeds. Common folk used it to relieve varicose veins. And you've heard that modern studies confirm its mild venotonic effects. This is the mainstream overlap you find surprising. Some of these plant extracts did have measurable benefits. Even if medieval preparations varied wildly in potency, on a narrow side table rests a large conical flask labeled thuriac. Legendary antidote concocted from dozens of ingredients: opium, viper flesh, myrrh, and yes, powdered mummy. You remember the vials of mummy powder in the monastery scriptorium now, fused into a cure-all mixture, worth its weight in gold. A fringe anecdote suggests it was so popular that unscrupulous merchants sold crushed bricks and animal bones instead. You chuckle at the thought. Nothing says miracle cure. Like a cocktail of grave-robbing leftovers, your phone buzzes in your pocket. a vibration that jars you from this medieval daydream. You fish it out, notice it's a group chat about dinner plans, and suppress the urge to text back a photo of crocodile dung. Modern conveniences feel absurd here: no Wi-Fi, no antiseptic surgical gloves, and definitely no Yelp reviews of plague treatments. Yet the herbalist glances at your gadget with mild curiosity, as if pondering what fringe remedy it might cure. He then presents a leather-bound herbal manuscript, its pages dense with small sketches of plants and marginalia notes. Use willow bark for fever. Beware heliotrope toothache. This copy of an early printed herbal holds both Roman botanical lore and local lore about hedgerow weeds. You flick through it, fingertips tracing the woodcut image of a fern frond. Marveling at the continuity, people have barked at trees for relief since time immemorial. Historians still argue whether these handbooks accelerated the shift from mystical to observational medicine, or merely codified centuries of Trilander superstition. A pungent whiff of garlic oil drifts your way as the herbalist warms a small flask over a candle. He drips a few amber drops into a tiny bowl and invites you to inhale. The acrid heat stings your nostrils, clearing your sinuses in seconds. You gasp, half coughing, half laughing. Your modern allergies would kill for this therapy. But imagine the stench trapped in sweaty bandages. Still, there's a lesson here. Some simple preparations offer genuine relief, rooted in plant chemistry that medieval minds barely understood but harnessed with surprising savvy. You step back, arms full of curiosities, jars of spores, powders of root, vials of oil, and that incriminating parchment of crocodile dung. The herbalist offers a small burlap pouch as you pay for your next adventure, a sample of lozenge powder to ease travel sickness. You nod gratefully, pocketing the pouch alongside your bezoar and mandrake sketch. Sitting into bright daylight, you shield your eyes and inhale deeply, tasting a mix of freedom and lingering herbal temps. Behind you, the shop's scent trail follows like an aromatic memory. A reminder that medieval medicine blended sound observation, bold experimentation, and a healthy dose of the fantastical. You adjust the straps on your satchel, feeling simultaneously cleansed and bizarrely intrigued. You find yourself on a narrow cobblestone street where the air vibrates with eager debate and the ring of metal-tipped canes against stone. Towering over cramped butcher stalls and zealous street preachers, the porticoed halls of the University of Bologna become a magnet for aspiring healers from Sicily to Scandinavia. Students in threadbare cloaks argue heatedly over contradictory manuscripts in dimly lit galleries, while professors stride past, globe-like heads crowned with whispered authority. Here, medicine emerges from the whispered hush of monastic scriptoria and smoky apothecaries, crystallizing into something more structured. A curriculum founded on Galen, Socrates, and the Arabic masters Avicenna and Rhazes. Medieval universities, beginning with Salerno in the 9th century and solidifying in Bologna by 1088, pioneered degrees in medicine, law, and theology, establishing the first formal training for physicians. You step under an arched gateway carved with the image of Aesculapius, ancient god of healing, and feel a free song of ambition. Inside the lecture hall, more echo chamber than classroom. Lecturer unrolls a massive vellum sheet illustrating the humoral system. He points at the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black biland in tones that balance equals health. A mainstream historical fact. Medical students studied from the Artisala, collection of key texts digesting centuries of theory, and were tested by oral disputation rather than written exams, sometimes lasting hours into the night. Around you, 2 students jab at each other with quills, debating whether Galen's anatomical descriptions were recent observations from a butcher's shop. Section carry, more weight. Historians still argue whether these hands-on observations truly dethroned ancient authority or merely supplemented it for a privileged minority. The scene is like a medieval Reddit flame war, minus the WI-V dot in a cramped corner. You overhear a fringe tidbit. A certain Salernitan healer reportedly tasted patients' urine to diagnose ailments. He claimed sweetness indicated diabetes centuries before the term existed. You avert your nose, imagining the world's first sip of pea-flavored, bitter truth. It's gross, but strangely on-brand for a time when diagnosis could mean sniffing bodily emissions. Sudden laughter ripples through a cluster of students fanning out parchments scribbled with notes on phlebotomy techniques. One novice asks his master, "How many leeches per humor?" The professor deadpans, "Enough to make your wallet thinner than your patient's veins." A light joke, yet a reminder that medical school tuition historically drained purses as surely as barbers drained blood. You follow two scholars into an adjoining chamber lined with glass lanterns. On a long wooden table lies a human skull, cleanly swept of flesh, illicit relic smuggled from an executed criminal. The students lean forward, lantern glow dancing. In their eyes, tracing cranial sutures and debating neuron channels, though the term wouldn't exist for centuries. It's a tension-filled scene. Holy bodies were taboo for dissection. Yet the thirst for anatomical knowledge pushed them to secretive digs. Historians still argue whether these clandestine sessions advanced medical science or simply indulged morbid curiosity. Beyond anatomy, you encounter the peculiar rituals of medical examinations. A candidate kneels before the rector, reciting a Latin oath while clutching a lamb's rib bone for solemnity, and then presents his thesis defense in front of assembled masters. It's performative, theatrical, and utterly exhausting. You can't help but quip silently, "I can barely handle my morning coffee without an enema," let alone a public disputation. Walking down a vaulted corridor, you notice a wooden board etched with regulations: no tavern brawls within the campus bounds, no enchanted potions sold under penalty of fine. A cheeky reminder that even medieval scholars enforced codes of conduct. Though black market elixirs still circulated, snake oil vendors were as ubiquitous then as they are now. You slip into the university's herb garden, more organized than any you've seen. Rows of sage, mint, and hyssop are laid out in geometric beds, intended not for monks this time, but for student observation. A slender professor plucks a leaf, crushes it, and inhales deeply before diagnosing his indigestion as a melancholy imbalance. You raise an eyebrow. Modern gastroenterologists would call it lunch regret, as dusk settles. The courtyard fills with the clamor of students mulling over medical quandaries. Should we follow Galen or trust Avicenna's interpretations? One asks. Another retorts, if only medieval Wi-Fi was as reliable as their humor theory. Laughter bubbles up, a reminder that the joys of academic rivalry transcend centuries. You pause before a stone bench carved with Gothic tracery and recall the horse chestnut seeds from the apothecary's Oleum hippocastani. Here, such plant studies are formalized into physical lectures, blending classical texts with local lore. Yet some nights, herbal skepticism flares. A professor denounces spiderweb balm as mere craven superstition. Historians still argue whether the shift toward observational empiricism in these university halls truly marked the end of medieval quackery or simply repackaged it in Latin prose. You rise as torchbearers ignite crescent sconces, casting dancing shadows across stained glass windows depicting biblical healings. The ambient glow softens your edges, and you feel the hush of centuries pressing around you. Despite rigorous debates and scholarly pomp, you sense that the heart of medieval medical education remained rooted in trial and virulent, sometimes bizarre, often frustratingly slow. Stepping back into the cool night air, you adjust your satchel containing mandrake sketches, bezoar stones, and dusty parchments. The musical clang of city bells drifts from a nearby church, mingling with the echoes of student laughter and distant chanting. A final joke drifts through your mind. Try not to reproduce their exam stress when you face modern deadlines. Ahead lies the plague-ravaged alleys where desperate treatments await quacks, pill cracks, and miracles, or maybe just another round of bloodletting. But for now, you carry the charged thrill of intellectual discovery, balanced precariously between ancient dogma and nascent science. You step into a narrow, garbage-strewn alley and immediately sense the weight of dread pressing against crumbling walls. A pungent fog of incense smoke and decomposing refuse hangs in the air, stinging your nostrils as you navigate past, shuttered windows plastered with quarantine notices scrawled in hasty Latin. The year is 1348. And the Black Death has crashed into port cities like a roving army of pestilence. You reel at the sight of cart-piled corpses outside the city gates, hulking lumps wrapped in coarse linen, left overnight to rot in the chill breeze. It's here that medieval medicine fractures under the unimaginable toll, forcing both frantic flight and desperate novel treatments upon the survivors. You skirt around a makeshift pest house where the sick lie moaning on wooden benches. A low moan escapes your throat, and you swallow hard. Mainstream reports tell us the plague killed up to 1/3 of Europe's population in just a few brutal years, wiping out villages and reducing crowded cities to ghost towns. Yet you also catch whispers of fringe practices. In Florence, some claimed to have cured the plague by inhaling fumes distilled from the burned bones of diseased sheep mixed with toxic herbs. You wrinkle your nose-burned bone. Ash does sound as appetizing as a charcoal latte. Historians still argue whether any of these inhalants had genuine antiseptic properties or simply masked symptoms. You follow a gaunt healer who clutches a bundle of sweet-smelling herbs, rose, Mary, sage, lavender bound together with crimson ribbon. He thrusts it under your nose and says, "Smell this always, and the miasma won't find you." It's the famous plague bouquet, mainstream enough that entire guilds of perfumers switched their wares overnight. Yet some townsfolk took it further, stuffing pungent onions or even dead chickens into their shirts, believing the stench would scare away the pestilent spirits. You stifle a laugh at the image of clucking fowl under your tunic. But the thought of dead birds pressed against your chest sends a real shiver down your spine. Venturing deeper into the stricken wards, you encounter a group of flagellants in tattered robes, their bare backs striped with bloody welts. They chant in unison, whipping themselves as penance for humanity's sins. Mainstream records show that flagellant movements surged across Germany and Italy during the plague's peak. You flinch as a whip cracks, and you muse that even a medieval version of CrossFit came with backup exorcists. Historians still argue whether these public displays of self-torture actually slowed the disease's spread by imposing spontaneous social distancing or simply fueled panic. A cry draws your gaze to a tinkling bronze pot swinging over a fire pit. Beside it, a healer stirs a seething concoction of vinegar, crushed garlic, and bay leaves. "This is our last hope," she murmurs, ladling steaming liquid into hollowed-out bread bowls for the afflicted. It's a fringe but pervasive remedy. People believed the vinegar's acidity could purge bad humors. You pick up a bowl, inhale the sharp tang, and take a cautious sip. It warms your throat, but the taste resembles medieval salad dressing gone wrong. Still, some survivors swore by these vinegar broths, claiming they eased fevered throats and offered fleeting comfort. You wander toward the city walls, pausing at a wooden beacon where guards inspect incoming travelers. A sign warns of a 40-day quarantine, la parola, 40 giorni, giving birth to the term quarantine. Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, had pioneered this practice as early as 1377. mandating isolation for arriving ships. Mainstream thinkers lauded quarantine's effectiveness, while fringe conspiracy theorists spread rumors that the measures were a ploy by local spice merchants to corner the market. Historians still argue whether quarantine truly curbed contagion, or simply delayed the inevitable spread by a few weeks as dusk falls. The stench of death intensifies under flickering lanterns. You stumble upon a back alley where a frantic healer, eyes wild, dips his bare hands into a bucket of human excrement mixed with herbs, swearing he's concocting a topical salve to iron out the plague boils. You nearly gag, yet find yourself hypnotized by the grim creativity of it all. This fringe remedy underscores medieval desperation. If nothing else worked, why not smear your own waste on festering sores? It's as revolting as it is grimly innovative. Turning away, you spot an open-air amphitheater where physicians in black cloaks lecture to dying patients perched on benches. Above them, a great glass orb hangs, dripping mysterious blue vapor. It's said to be aqua spongiae, water distilled through sponges soaked in urine intended to capture elusive plague essences. The audience coughs in unison, coughing echoed by your own chest. You think, a few centuries later, Pasteur would roll his eyes so hard they'd get stuck. A single figure stands apart. A scholar-physician with scrolls tucked under one arm and a lantern in the other. He studies the dying with a sober calm, marking their symptoms in a tattered notebook. Unlike most of his peers who chased humors with blades and potions, K compiles date, age, sex, profession, symptom onset, hoping to find patterns. This foresight anticipates later public health studies and the roots of epidemiology. You nod in admiration. It's a startling beacon of reason amid chaos. Before you leave the city's edge, you pass a lamenting widow kneeling by a bonfire of document spills. Letters, property deeds, tossing them into the flames to distract her grief. It's a fringe ritual of release, a way to sever ties to a lost life and prevent spiritual contagion. You feel a pang of sorrow as ash drifts skyward, mingling with the sulphury smoke. Even the charred remains seem to whisper, no remedy for heartbreak. Only time. Stepping out into the silent fields beyond the city, you take a shaky breath of open air. The distant clang of a church bell signals evening vespers, a brief echo of normalcy. Your satchel jostles against your side inside. You carry the plague bouquet, a vial of vinegar broth, and a scrap of the excrement salve recipe you couldn't bring yourself to taste twice. The world ahead feels fragile, as if each step could be your last or your path to newfound knowledge. You lift your head toward the stars, once guides for astrologers diagnosing humors. Now distant pinpoints in a void that claimed millions. Even these celestial bodies feel more mysterious, unchanged by the panic below. A light joke drifts through your mind. At least, star charts don't carry fleas. Yet clarity settles in your chest. The Black Death broke medieval medicine's confidence, revealed its limits, and ignited a drive toward empirical observation. Historians still argue whether the plague's devastation accelerated the demise of humoral theory or simply mass murdered its staunchest defenders. You trudge onward, haunted by the echo of distant moans and the memory of puny human concoctions, battling an unfathomable foe. Ahead, the world will rebuild, medical guilds will refine quarantine, and rationalists will find courage to demand evidence over dogma. But for now, you carry the scars of shock and a grudging respect for those who, in utter desperation, hurled every ounce of creativity against the tide of death. You drift through a bustling market square where stalls groan under the weight of glass bottles glinting in midday sun, promising miraculous cures for every ache and ailment. A gaudy cart painted in scarlet and gold booms with a trumpeter, announcing the arrival of Dr. Verulam's Wonder Elixir, an itinerant healer. His reputation travels faster than the plague's rumor mill. You sidestep a half-dozen hawkers peddling royally approved powders, eyeing them warily. Mainstream records note that by the 14th century, some quacks even secured charters or letters patent from local lords, lending a veneer of legitimacy to their potions and ointments. Yet beneath the flourish of velvet capes and embroidered sashes lies a world where confidence often eclipsed competence, and fear fueled every sale. Historians still argue whether such charlatans did more to harm the public or inadvertently spread genuine medical knowledge in their wake. A tall man in a plum-colored tunic gestures wildly from atop a wooden crate, a small brass horn slung around his neck. Come one, come all. Witness the cure for gout, rheumatism, and unrequited love, he exclaims, splashing a thick syrup into tin cups. The syrup smells faintly of honey and something else too sweet to trust. You edge closer, drawn by curiosity and a hidden urge to scoff, though you secretly wonder if that amber dribble could numb your own weary joints. A light joke floats through your thoughts. This is the only time you'll willingly taste something made by a stranger who carries tarantula venom. Behind you, a crowd surges around a pair of jugglers brandishing glinting lancets. They nick volunteer arms, producing tiny spots of red, then dab on a yellowish paste called elixir of mercury. Yes, mercurian, old favorite among fringe remedies dripped onto wounds to draw out toxins. You shudder, recalling modern warnings that mercury can turn you into a glowing madman rather than a healthy one. Still, those willing to risk Minamata-like madness believed the paste had potent antiseptic properties. Historians still argue whether any of these metallic concoctions actually killed germs or simply killed patients in slow, agonizing ways. The trumpeter's flourish wanes as you weave past a tent draped in tiger pelts. Inside, an exuberant healer, named Sister Agatha, no relation to actual nuns, dispenses angel's breath, a concoction of crushed pearls, rose water, and powdered human skull. She sprinkles a pinch into boiling water and hands you a porcelain cup. A fringe tidbit, skull powder, sometimes called mummia, if sourced from Egyptian tombs, was believed to staunch bleeding and soothe ulcers. You brace for the taste. It's oddly sweet, like chalk-infused tea, and you marvel at humanity's capacity to sip ground-up ancestors as medicine. A light joke drifts by. At least the ancestors get to go full circle once dead. Now your bittersweet beverage, as you step back into the sunlit square. You nearly trip over a ragged boy hawking flyers scrawled with red ink. Learn the new powder of sympathy healed wounds by sympathizing with their weapons. According to this bizarre remedy, you place the patient's weapon in a bowl of water. Then apply that watered-down essence over the wound, transferring pain relief through a sympathetic link. It's fringe, even by quackery standards, and scholars still argue whether the powder of sympathy ever had any real effect or was simply a theatrical distraction. You approach a side table, where two women in motley coats hold up a wooden mannequin studded with Pinson, early form of puppet medicine. Prick the doll where you feel pain, one instructs, and your body shall follow. You can't decide if it's witchcraft or performance art. Curious onlookers take tiny needles and jab at the doll's pinched waist, wincing theatrically with each poke. A light joke flutters in your mind. If modern therapists had puppets, they'd save a fortune on session fees. Despite the theatrics, some swear by this method, attributing relief to the mind's trickery, rather than any magical transference. Overhead, a trio of minstrels strikes up a jaunty tune, their stringed instruments brightening the mood. You inhale fragrant smoke as another healer lights a bundle of herbs, juniper, tansy, and nightshade to fumigate the area. The haze drifts through the crowd, and you find yourself coughing, but also oddly soothed. Mainstream accounts acknowledge that fumigation sometimes helped clear noxious odors and perhaps reduced pestilence. Though nightshade's toxicity makes you question the actual benefit, historians still argue whether the practice truly curbed infections or merely accompanied superstitious pageantry. A dignified-looking man in scholarly robes observes the scene from a raised dais. He's an actual physician who's come to audit the quacks, clipboard in hand. You spot him whispering with a skeptical barber surgeon about the ethical gray zone between medicine and huckstery. They share a wry grin you can practically hear. They're modern thoughts. These peddlers are great for entertainment, but would you trust one with your appendix? This crowd control of charlatans gave rise to early licensing efforts. As towns tried to regulate who could sell remedies and who would be carted off to debtor's prison for false claims, your wandering brings you to a side street, where a red-legged goose stands beside a low stool. A pale healer named Brother Wilfred plucks its feathers, grinds them with lard, and applies the greasy paste to a patient's inflamed joint. Feather ointment, fringe but persistent, was believed to absorb heat and reduce swelling. As the man flexes his knee, grimacing, then nods appreciatively. Maybe goose fat is the ancient cousin of modern muscle rubs. Historians still argue whether animal-derived saves had any biochemical benefit or served mostly as comforting massage aids. A sudden jingle draws your gaze to a small wagon, where a woman with a tambourine spills dragon's blood salve onto her palm, then rubs it on a scarred chest. It tastes metallic, sticky enough to glue her tunic in place. Dragon's blood was actually a resin from the crocus tree, used topically for wounds and ulcers. Despite its fantastical name, it appears in medieval pharmacopoeias, hinting at genuine application amid grandiose marketing. A light joke emerges. Nothing sells better than a name that promises mythical power. Just ask any modern supplement aisle. You pause, tucking your cloak tighter as a sudden breeze rustles the crowd. Beneath the clamor, you hear an actual bell. Chima signal from the city's medical guild that unlicensed healers must vacate. The quacks disperse like startled pigeons, leaving behind trampled flyers and empty vials. You scoop up a few discarded corks and empty file souvenirs of the Carnival of Cures as you stroll away. The square returns to its usual rhythm of merchants hawking cheese and tanners curing hides. The memory of garish tents and extravagant promises fades, replaced by mundane commerce. Yet you carry with you the lessons of quacks and itinerant healers in a world starving for hope. People will lap up any remedy that looks the part. Sometimes a confident sales pitch offered real psychological comfort, even if the potion was nothing more than colored water. Other times, the desperation led to dangerous mercury concoctions or skull-smashing powders. You flex your hand, where you once held that chalky skull tea, and laugh softly. History's greatest cure, evidently, is skepticism. You slip through a heavy oaken door into a narrow corridor lit by a single iron sconce whose flame flickers against damp stone walls. The echo of dripping water slides through the tunnel like a whispered warning as you follow a hooded assistant, clutching a lantern. Tonight, you're about to witness a clandestine dissection, a ritual once reserved for scholars and condemned criminals, performed in hushed secrecy amid churchly qualms. Historians still argue whether this fragile truce between faith and curiosity paved the way for modern anatomy or merely scratched the surface of human mystery. A thin haze of incense lingers in the air, pennyroyal and juniper, meant to mask the iron tang of decay. Despite the scent, each breath carries a subtle sting, reminding you that embalming barely slowed the corpse's embrace of rot. You feel the heat of your own anxiety as the assistant swings open a curtained partition, Within, a semicircle of rough-hewn benches arcs around a stone slab where a pale body lies, shrouded in linen. The room, known unofficially as the theatrum mortis, is colder than the corridor, once solemn and electric. A lecturer, his brown robe catching the lantern glow, steps forward. He unmasks himself. Professor Fra Angelo, a slight man, with calloused fingers and eyes bright as obsidian. He places a leather-bound tome on a stand, opens it to a woodcut of human muscles, and intones. Today we shall see what Galen never knew. Galen dissected animals, not humans, and his errors trickled through a millennium of medical teaching. You recall the marginalia basilisk from that monastery. Herbal scholars did enjoy embellishing old lore. Here, the stakes are higher. Error now exposes the naked truth of the human frame. Fra Angelo draws a sharp scalpel cold, polished steel that gleams like a promise. His finger hovers over the corpse's abdomen, tension rippling in his lean shoulders. The hush is so complete, you can hear the soft rasp of leather gloves and the distant scrape of iron cauldron from an adjoining alchemy chamber. With a clean incision, he parts the linen to reveal pale flesh glistening under candlelight. A gasp escapes you, half in awe, half in horror. Mainstream records credit Bologna with hosting public human dissections from 1315 onward. Mandino Deliuzzi famously presided over one of the first, but such events remained rare spectacles, often attended by physicians in capes who sketched quickly, lest the body's chemistry betray them. Tonight's group is smaller, sworn to secrecy, a motley crew of university students, a barber surgeon, and a sympathetic friar who serves as reluctant gatekeeper. You grip the edge of your bench. It feels stamped with centuries of nervous anticipation. The first layer of skin peels back with a soft pop. A faint, coppery scent surges up your nostrils. It's not quite blood. It's more a mix of clotted remnants and something like old iron filings. Fra Angelo unearths a coil of intestines. He points with a slender probe, tracing the spiral colon's loops as he lectures on digestion. Food travels through this labyrinth, he murmurs, where hot bile and cold phlegm mix, nourishing or poisoning our humors. A student leans in, annotating furiously, while another whispers about the skull powder they once sipped as tea. At least that was less gory, you think Riley? When he reaches the heart, surface still moves with residual tremors, a final echo of life. He pauses, hands steady, and invites a young scholar forward. The student's quivering voice tries to remain steady as he names the parts: ventricles, atria, coronary vessels. Then the professor lets him make the first cut into the pericardium. The blade slices through thin membranes with surprising ease. A hush falls so deep you can hear your own heartbeat, far louder now than the corpse's silent stillness. A small jar of rose water stands on a side table, used to cleanse the scalpel between layers. Its scent wafts faintly, a counterpoint to decay, much like the cozy lull of rosewater tea on a stuffy afternoon. It feels ironic. Centuries ago, rosewater soothed throats and spirits alike. Here, it also calms the stench of breakdown. A fringe rumor suggests some anatomists sprinkled rose petals over the table to appease wandering spirits of the dead. You catch yourself half expecting a ghost to slide from the corner. Suddenly, a soft scrape from the back door makes you flinch. A monkey administrator slips in, face drawn. He whispers to Fra Angelo. The bishop sends 3 guards. They suspect rumors of heresy. Tension spikes like an electric shock. You realize that every slice threatens not just the corpse, but the professor's freedom. Historians still argue whether these dissections truly advanced science or risked igniting the church's ire against hubristic anatomists. The professor addresses the group in a low voice. Calm yourselves. Many great advances were born in defiance of fear. He lifts a rigid femur bone, its surface chalky white, and wraps it gently on a wooden mortar. A crack echoes. Serve the marrow's texture. It nourishes our blood, or so Galen thought. You remember that mound of mummy powder in the apothecary ground human bits once believed to staunch bleeding? Here, the hard bones reveal architecture rather than cure. Context matters. A student hesitantly asks about the smell. Fra Angelo chuckles. Welcome to our medieval freshwater lab, minus the chlorine. It's your second joke of the night, though in a rough room like this, laughter always tugs at nerves. The professor brushes back fly specks with a green willow twig. Stray insects seem drawn to exposed flesh. He warns that in Venice, they once dissected a live prisoner Anne. Extreme fringe account rarely verified just to see how muscles moved under pain. You shudder. That's a dissection more twisted than bloodletting. As the guards approach, you notice the professor's students lift the corpse's limbs, naming sinews and tendons with reverent care. They've reached the shoulder joint now. Fra Angelo explains how the scapula glides, connecting bone to muscle. He injects a thin stream of vinegar into a joint to distinguish flesh layers a crude contrast agent. Centuries ahead of CT scans. The smell of vinegar cuts through the copper temps, a strangely cleansing hiss in your ear. You wince. But even this primitive method hints at scientific impulse. Curiosity outweighs comfort. Before the guards arrive, Fra Angelo recites a brief prayer dedicating the knowledge gained to the Almighty's glory. It's a final nod to his faith, a safeguard against accusations of sacrilege. The assistant lowers the shroud over the body. From the pulsing glow of newly lit sconces, the corpses. Secrets retreat into sacred silence once more. You exhale, shoulders trembling, heart still pounding. Stepping back into the corridor, you feel sweat cooling on your brow. The guard's footsteps recede as the corridor swallows them, leaving you alone with your racing thoughts. Tonight, you've seen where science and superstition clashed in raw intimacy, where sacred taboos bowed before the scalpel's edge. You recall the medieval revere for relics, the mythical toad powders, even that dusty parchment of crocodile dung, and realize they all sprang from the same well. Human desperation to conquer disease and death. As you emerge into crisp night air, you lift your lantern high, noticing how its flame sputters beneath a starless sky. A lone owl hoots from a distant tower, nature's timeless sentinel. You tuck your notes and sketch of the ribcage into your satchel, alongside that rosewater jar and your mandrake doodle. The world ahead feels charged. Anatomical truths hidden in church vaults, stolen in darkness, will one day become public knowledge. You weave through lantern-lit lanes until you come upon a timber-framed cottage, ringed by honeysuckle and rosemary, its door ajar, as if inviting you into a secret world. Inside, the air is warm with simmering herbal steam, and the fire crackles. In a blackened hearth whose soot-streaked bricks carry the comfort of familiarity. A woman in a faded woolen dress stands over a wooden table cluttered with jars. One holds yellowed rose petals. Another, a cloudy tincture labeled Luna's Tears. She looks up, offering you a cup of min-tandoc infusion. You sip it slowly, teeth grazing the tannic edge, savoring the soothing tingle. This is the realm of women healers, midwives, and wise folk who carried the community's health long before physicians held court in ivory towers. Mainstream records show that by the 15th century, women constituted the majority of rural healers in many European regions, offering childbirth support, herbal cures, and household remedies passed down through generations. You perch on a stool, watching her dexterous fingers weave a poultice from jewel-toned dried violets, wormwood, and a pinch of salt. She crushes petals with a pestle, releasing a soft, floral perfume that mingles with smoke from the hearth. As she works, she murmurs an old rhyme half-prayer, half-recipe to coax the medicine's power. In bloom of night, bring calm too. Plight wounds be healed by moon's soft light. Scholars still argue whether such whispered verses held any therapeutic efficacy or simply deepened patients' faith in the cure. You recall the basilisk doodle in that monastic herbal and smile? Magic and medicine often share the same parchment dot. By her side sits an apprentice. A shy girl whose hands tremble as she writes the woman's instructions in a leather-bound notebook. The apprentice nods vigorously when you ask about unicorn horn powder. "Oh yes," she says, excitement lighting her dark eyes. Just a speck in gruel can strengthen a mother's milk, or so they say. This fringe tidbit echoes the narwhal. Tusk lore from that apothecary shop, reminding you that animal parts held mythical prestige. Yet, here, the midwife tosses the thinnest dusting into a bowl, hardly a cavalier sprinkle of skull powder, nor the greasy goose-fat salve you encountered in the square. You joke that between unicorn horn and crocodile dung, medieval pharmacies felt like an enchanted menagerie. The woman midwife moves behind a low wooden screen, where a young mother breathes heavily on a straw mattress. You step closer, careful to keep your boots silent on the flagstones. The room feels hushed, suspended between fear and hope. Lowering her voice, the midwife instructs the laboring woman to press a warm cloth infused with crushed pennyroyal against her temples. Its minty heat sharpens the senses, countering pain with a rush of cool clarity. This practice was mainstream among midwives. Pennyroyal teas and compresses eased labor pains for centuries. Even though modern herbalists caution about toxicity in high doses, historians still argue whether midwives understood the risks they courted or simply relied on generational wisdom to navigate narrow margins of safety. You shift your gaze to the hearth's mantle, where an assortment of small figures stands. Carved bone talismans, a dried toad tied with red thread, and a tiny glass vial labeled Wise Woman's Eye. The midwife explains that the eye contains the essence of a child's first cry. It's believed to ward off the evil eye and protect vulnerable newborns. It's a fringe concoction that blends superstition with heartfelt hope. Her hands tremble slightly as she blesses each token before a worried father arrives to collect them. You can't help but tease softly. With all these charms, the infant might need a diploma in charmology before learning to crawl. Despite the domestic calm, the specter of persecution prowls outside these walls. You recall the black-clad guards who carted away suspected witches in the market square, dragging them through jeers and frightened whispers. Mainstream legal documents reveal that during the 15th and 16th centuries, thousands of women, many of them healers and midwives, were tried for witchcraft. Accusations often stemmed from neighborly grudges, jealousy over successful remedies, or simple fear of what they didn't understand. You feel a pang of unease as you sip your mint infusion. Could your herbal hostess be next? Sudden knock at the door sends your heart racing. The midwife exchanges a tense glance with her apprentice and silences you with a raised hand. They slip into a hidden pantry stuffed behind a tapestry, leaving you alone in the flickering half-light. You press your ear to the cracked door too. Hear muffled voices to men in crumpled clerical robes demanding to inspect the workshop for signs of sorcery. You grip the chair's edge, nails biting into oak, as the door creaks open and daylight floods the room. An inquisitor steps in, his face tight with suspicion. He sniffs the air, wrinkling his nose at the herbal steam, and notices the row of jars. "What is this?" he demands, picking up a jar of dried toad legs. "Tadpole dust, will it sprout limbs on the infirm?" You swallow a laugh and bite back a quip. Better limbs than leeches. The midwife emerges, calm as dawn, kneeling to meet his gaze. "These are remedies, sir," she says softly. "Gifts from God's creation to ease his children's suffering." She offers him her cupped hands, clasped in humility. The inquisitor's gaze flicks to the wise woman's eye, and he tuts. Superstitious nonsense. He insists on dumping the contents of each jar into his robe pocket, labeling them instruments of witchcraft. You resist the urge to protest. Arguing with zealots seldom ends well. Yet you note how the very knowledge passed down from mothers to daughters can be twisted into damning evidence. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations served primarily as misogynistic control over female autonomy or were genuinely fueled by moral panic and fear of contagion. After a tense pause, the midwife humbly invites the inquisitor to share a draught of her mint-tanned dock tea. Her voice carries a melody that seems to soften the rigid lines of his judgmental visage. He sniffs the brew, audible to everyone, then takes a small sip. Surprisingly, his shoulders relax and his frown eases. You hold your breath. Could simple hospitality and a pleasant flavor tip the balance between life and death? He hands back the cup, mutters beneficial, and departs, pockets heavy with instruments. You exhale, tension uncoiling like a dawn breeze as the door thuds shut. The midwife and apprentice re-emerge, faces pale but resolute. The next mother is due soon, and they must press on despite ever-present dread. You rise, brushing off your cloak, and pocket a small sprig of dried mugwort, offered as a token of courage. It smells bittersweet, a reminder that healing often mingles with fear. You step outside into moonlit silence, lantern in hand, recalling that earlier sanctuary of the monasteries and the clamorous market square where quacks peddled skull powder. Here, the quiet courage of women healers threads a fragile line between community care and persecution. You wander away, mugwort scent, clinging to your fingers. Pondering the paradox, in a world where knowledge could mean salvation, it could also mark you for the stake. Despite the risk, these women armed villages with remedies, comfort, and stubborn hope. You press the mugwort sprig to your nose, inhaling its promise of resilience. Ahead, the leech clinic waits, and beyond that, the stars still guide the astrologers, diagnosing humors. Yet tonight, it's the whispered wisdom of midwives that echoes loudest in your mind. A testament to quiet defiance and enduring compassion. You step into a low-ceilinged cellar below a timber-bird townhouse, the air thick with damp earth and the metallic temps of vinegar. Wooden racks lined with glass jars clank as you pass, each jar brimming with dark, wriggling leeches that press against the glass like living shadows. A shallow wooden trough runs beneath a narrow window, water trickling softly over slick stones. This is the heart of leechcraft's sticky empire, where medieval practitioners coax blood-sucking annelids into living pharmacies. A middle-aged apothecary in a stained leather vest greets you with a wink. His fingertips are blackened by handling. Jars of iron sulfate and honey water OLED, old trick to keep leeches hungry and wriggly. He lifts a jar and pours its contents into a silver basin. Dozens of leeches wriggle together in a slimy pile, their bellies distended, tiny suckers gnashing. Like miniature Pac-Men, shiver at the sight, but can't tear your eyes away. Mainstream treatises by Galen and later Islamic scholars such as Avicenna recommended leeching for reducing excessive blood and treating localized inflammation. You lower your lantern onto a rough-hewn table, the faint glow revealing stains of old blood and herbal pigments. The apothecary cups a single leech between two ivory forceps and places it on your palm. Its body pulses once, twice, then curls onto your skin with surprising warmth. You almost whisper, "Is this a spa day or a horror show?" A light joke escapes before you can stop it, and the apothecary chuckles, calling it the original bloodletting facial. As the leech begins to nibble, you feel a soft tug and then a slight sting, only a pinch, like a mosquito times 10. You recall the barber surgeon's lancets from the old shop and think, those did feel more like tiny daggers. Here, the leeches. Caress is almost soothing. Historians still argue whether leech therapy truly yielded clinical benefits or simply exploited the patient's belief in balancing humors. Your gaze drifts to a dusty corner where glass vials of preserved leech eggs glimmer under the lantern's flame. The apothecary explains that medieval folks believed leeches spontaneously generated in swampy water, a fringe notion inherited from ancient spontaneous generation lore. They even held festivals to collect virgin leeches, convinced those starry-eyed specimens were the purest antidote for fever. Suppress a grin at the idea of virgin leeches being the talk of the town. But you admit it speaks to the heiress blend of hope and myth. A draft from the window carries the scent of crushed hyssop and rue antiseptic herbs scattered on the floor to ward off rot. You recall the monastery's herb garden and feel the familiar comfort of botanical aromas. The apothecary plucks a sprig of rue and drops it into the trough, murmuring an old rhyme to keep pests at bay. You lean in to smell it, bitter, green, with a touch of acrid spice that tickles your nostrils. He fetches a leather-bound ledger and shows you entries dating back decades. One entry notes that a local noblewoman was treated with leeches for a migraine so severe she saw the devil's horns of pain. After applying 30 leeches, 15 to each temple, she claimed relief. It's a mainstream anecdote echoed in many medieval chronicles, though scholars still debate whether her headache truly improved or she simply passed out from blood loss. From behind the counter, the apothecary produces a fringe concoction, leech oil, rendered from boiled leeches mixed with plant oils and myrrh. He rubs a drop between his fingers and offers you a sniff. The oily scent is nauseating, like rancid seaweed steeped in tar. He insists it eases joint pain when rubbed into arthritic knees. You joke that your modern gym's recovery balm could never rival this medieval eel essence. Yet he demonstrates on a visitor's stiff elbow, massaging until the skin pricks red. The room fills with the smell of cooking fish and incense. You shudder and admire their determination to extract every possible use from these slimy healers. A wooden sign creaks overhead. No bartering below after dusk. You recall quacks in the market square, hawking powdered skulls under lantern glow. Here, regulations are tighter. Only licensed leech collectors and apothecaries may handle the vermiform healers. You overhear two assistants arguing over a shipment of disposable leeches. One insists their supply came from a newly drained pond, while the other warns that pond leeches often carry swamp rot. You note this early quality control debate echoes modern pharmaceutical arguments. Substances are only as pure as their source. At a long bench, a county physician in a threadbare cloak examines a patient's swollen ankle. He applies a mustard plaster around the joint, then strategically places a ring of leeches onto the skin, spacing them like soldiers around a fortress. As they latch on, he explains that leech saliva contains hirudin, a natural anticoagulant. Of course, medieval practitioners didn't know its molecular action, but they observed that leech bites bled for hours without clots, believing it kept harmful blockages at bay. You feel a thrill, empirical observation flickering through the haze of superstition. The cellar's single lantern gutter flicks, throwing shadows that dance across the stone walls. You shiver, partly from the chill, partly from the army of leeches slurping at ankles and wrists. A light joke crosses your mind. This is the only time you'll accept blood from a creature older than your dentist. Kay nods in agreement. then hums a line from a popular tavern song to lighten the mood. When the leech treatment concludes, the apothecary shows you the next step. Vinegar and salt water poured over the wounds to coax the leeches to release. They swell further, then detach with a wet pop, flopping back into the basin. You quickly wipe the red welts with a woolen cloth, one of the rare medieval bandages softened by boiled starch. The sting is gone, leaving behind a cool numbness. You flex your fingers, marveling at how something so ancient feels almost therapeutic. He wraps your arm in a linen bandage soaked in comfrey and honey, an anodyne combination known to soothe inflammation. You breathe in the sweet, tangy aroma and think, this is perhaps the gentlest ending any bloodletting could have. Though you remember the barber surgeon's rough gauze and the pungent leech oil, you admit the comfrey honey bandage might win on comfort. You rise, brushing soil from your doublet as you step toward the steps leading up to the street. Before you go, the apothecary presses a small corked vial into your hand. Inside, a solitary leech floats in diluted wena, traveling companion against rheumatism or bites. For emergencies, he says with a grin. You tuck it into your satchel, next to the mandrake sketch and the mugwort sprig, feeling like a medieval Boy Scout. Exiting into the cool night air, you inhale deeply, catching the faint whiff of river water mixed with distant smoke. The sound of hooves clopping on cobblestones echoes behind you, a reminder that, above ground, the city sleeps uneasily. You pat your wrapped arm, noting the warmth creeping back through your veins. This was no barbaric spectacle. It was a calculated ritual of removal and renewal. Leeches bled you, then science and superstition stitched you back together as you make your way toward the next stop, perhaps the astrologer's dome where stars dictate diagnoses. You carry with you a jarred emblem of sticky resilience. Leeches may seem revolting now, but medieval medicine prized them as indispensable allies. Their legacy endures. You've seen boutique spas touting leech facials centuries later. Historians still argue whether the therapeutic value justified the risk or simply tapped into humanity's willingness to endure discomfort for the promise of relief. You pause at a lamppost. Empty streets stretching before you like unwritten parchment. The leech in your vial wriggles once, a faint reminder that life and medicine often crawls along the edges of discomfort. You smile, adjusting your cloak. Ahead lies the astrologer's chamber, where you'll chart the heavens for humors gone awry. But for now, your heartbeat is steady, your skin tingles with memory, and you feel strangely connected to centuries of hands both human and leech working in tandem to keep fear at bay. You emerge from the narrow alley into the hushed courtyard of an imposing stone tower crowned by a gleaming bronze dome. A faint breeze carries the metallic temps of night-blooming jasmine mixed with the distant hoot of an owl. Inside, a spiral staircase coils upward, each step worn smooth by countless seekers of celestial counsel. At the summit, you push open a hatch and find yourself beneath a vast canopy of stars, mapped in constellations etched on polished brass. This is the astrologer's sanctum, where medieval physicians chart the heavens to diagnose maladies of body and spirit. A lean scholar in saffron robes greets you, his gaze flicking between a leather-bound journal and a large, rotating armillary sphere. He invites you to sit on a cushioned bench strewn with star charts, zodiac medallions, and curious amulets carved from jet and bone. You sink into the velvet, the fabric whispering against your tunic, and glance at a table loaded with jars of mandragora rutan, echo of that village healer's hut where mandrake screams could shatter eardrums, or so they claimed. A lighter thought nudges you. Thank goodness. These roots are safely crushed and powdered, rather than left to shriek. The astrologer unrolls a parchment dotted with planetary symbols and fine ink lines weaving through constellations. He points. to a complex diagram showing the moon traversing Leo as Mars conjoins Saturn in Scorpio. A mainstream fact: medieval physicians often cast a natal chart for a patient's birth time, believing planetary positions influenced humoral balance and disease susceptibility. The process, known as iatromathematics, blended astronomy, mathematics, and medicine into a single, skyward art. Historians still argue whether such star-based diagnostics provided genuine insight or simply lent weighty ritual to guesswork. You lean forward, brushing a finger over the glyph for Jupiter, once thought to govern the liver and thus linked to melancholy if misaligned. He explains that if Jupiter sat in its detriment, a patient might suffer jaundice or depressive humors. To correct the imbalance, the physician would time treatments, bloodletting, enemas, or poultices when the moon entered a benefic sign, hoping to harness celestial goodwill. You can't help but quip, scheduling your annual checkup based on a lunar transit sounds like booking a dentist appointment when Mercury isn't retrograde. Beside the chart, slender glass vial glints with star dew, water collected at midnight from the petals of evening primrose under a waxing crescent. The astrologer sprinkles a few drops onto a cloth and invites you to inhale. The dew scent is sweetly floral with a hint of damp grass. According to fringe lore, star dew could sharpen eyesight and ward off night terrors by absorbing lunar essence. You take a cautious sniff, and for a moment, swear you can almost see the next full moon etched behind your eyelids. On a low shelf, you spot a battered cube of black stone engraved with tiny zodiac figures. It's a lodestone from a meteorite coveted as a starstone. Folks believed that grinding it into powder and inhaling the dust could realign skewed humors. Though you imagine the heavy metal toxicity risk outweighed any mystical benefit. A light joke bubbles up. Modern detox teas could never compete with a pinch of star metal dust. Yet the sheer spectacle of a physician weighing cosmic iron against your pulse speaks to medieval flair. The astrologer consults his pocket sundial to confirm local time and begins casting a hoary chart for you, asking your exact birth date and hour. You slip out your own meticulously scribbled notes, unlikely callback to those Salerno students disputing Galen's authority. He calculates ascendants, rulers of houses, and planetary dignities with swift fingers. As he aligns a weighted cord over the armillary sphere, you feel the hush deepen every metallic click, echoing like a heartbeat. Then comes the intriguing tidbit. He uncovers a small, tattered notebook penned by an itinerant healer who used the medicine of the spheres to predict plague outbreaks. The healer charted the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter above specific regions, claiming it portended pestilence in those lands. Such predictions fueled both fear and supposed preparedness. People stockpiled vinegar broths and plague bouquets. Weeks before the first waves hit, historians still argue whether astrological plague forecasts ever offered actionable foresight, or simply sparked self-fulfilling panic. You watch as the astrologer consults the table of planetary hours, dividing the daylight into segments, each governed by a different planet. He chooses the hour of Venus for applying your comfrey honey bandage, arguing the soothing, nourishing power of Venus best supports healing tissues. It's the same comfrey and honey you felt warm against your leech-bitten arm, now tethered to cosmic vibrations. You grin. Your medieval treatment plan is beginning to sound like a spa menu curated by a zodiac app. He flicks a small hourglass, half full of pale sand, and says, treatments delayed past the planetary hour, risk falling under malefic influence. You peer at the grains slipping downward and joke that modern life hardly thrives under such rigid scheduling if you threw out your Fitbit. Yet the astrologer insists that timing was critical. Bleed when the moon's a friend, massage when Mercury's in motion, and never cut when Mars frowns. Across the room, a cluster of silver bowls holds colored powders labeled with zodiac signs Aries, peppered with powdered mallow for its warming nature. Virgo, mixing ground coriander. For digestion and Sagittarius housing, a bitter gall of goat for liver detox. The astrologer invites you to sprinkle the Aries powder into a sachet and tie it around your arm to invigorate circulation. You do so, feeling the rough grains scratch your skin and conjure a third joke: medieval wearable technologist stone. Age smart bands. Indeed, the gold segment of the armillary glows softly in torchlight as he concludes your chart. He murmurs an esoteric phrase and seals the parchment with a lump of red wax stamped by his signet, ring a reassuring gesture that this star-spun prescription is official. You cradle the scroll, its edges curling from candle heat and scents. A blend of reverence and skepticism bud in your chest. The scent of molten wax mingles with jasmine and rue, reminding you of leeches writhing in vinegar troughs and mandrake's earthy musk. He folds the scroll, places it in a leather tube, and hands it to you. Follow these stellar directives for the next fortnight, he advises, and may the spheres guide your humors to harmony. You nod, savoring the weight of star-charted destiny in your hand. Mainstream sources note that many medieval courts employed court physicians who combined astrology with pharmacology, wielding both charts and concoctions to govern royal health. As you prepare to descend back to street level, you ask about dissenting voices who distrusted astrology's sway. The astrologer shrugs and smiles. There were always skeptics. Some argued that stars are distant fires and can't meddle in mortal veins. Historians still argue whether astrology truly shaped medieval outcomes or served as a comforting narrative to cloak guesswork in cosmic authority. He guides you down the spiral staircase, the glow of brass reflecting dusk's last light filtering. Through arrow slits, stepping out into the cobblestone alley, you feel the chill of night air teasing your skin. The parchment feels snug in your satchel, nestled beside the solitary leech in wine and the sprig of mugwort. You inhale deeply, tasting jasmine and rue with a dash of cool stone. A final joke teases your lips, if your horoscope tells you to. Avoid sharp objects. Maybe don't sign up for more bloodletting. You trudge onward toward the next destination, a musty infirmary. Its windows glowing with lamplight and the soft murmur of prayers. But tonight, you carry the heavens in your pocket, a cosmic prescription mapping your path through medieval medicine's blend of stars, herbs, and human hope. You step from the astrologer's niche back into the cobbled streets. Then follow the damp scent of incense and despair until a squat stone building emerges through swirling mist-tight signboard. A simple iron cross over an open doorway. You pause at the threshold of the medieval hospital, where hope and squalor share every crowded chamber. The door creaks as you slip inside, greeted by the nitrogen tinge of unwashed bodies, the dull ache of moans, and the swirling dust motes, dancing in torchlight. This is charity care at its royest, a sanctuary for the poor, the pilgrims, and the plague survivors who could barely afford a prayer, let alone a physician's fee. Historians still argue whether these hospitals served more as healing centers or as way stations toward the grave. A narrow aisle lined with straw-strewn beds stretches left and right, each cot heaped with groaning patients. The straw is filthy, enough to host its own insect army bedbugs, lice. And where sand, you realize your modern mattress feels like a luxury yacht cabin. A light joke flits through your mind. The only time you'll be grateful you never lived before mattress foam. The wards reek of unfiltered sweat and unguent scarlet poultices bubbling on open coals. Iron-based salves caked on fevered skin. And an undercurrent of brine that suggests last night's river catch turned into a miasma magnet in one corner. A barefoot friar ladles watery gruel into chipped wooden bowls. You edge closer, discerning that the broth is thin enough to qualify as air freshener, If air freshener could smell like medieval soup. Mainstream records note that hospitals like Paris's Hotel G, it's founded in the 7th century and still running through your time. It's offered meager sustenance and rudimentary care to thousands annually. Yet food here serves as both nutrition and pacification. If you can call a handful of barley digestible, you pass a sickbed where a nurse sprinkles powdered mummy ground Egyptian flesh onto a wound, then covers it with a linen patch smeared in rosewater and honey. It's a fringe tidbit you've seen before. The macabre belief that mixing human remains into bandages could staunch bleeding or draw out infection. You wince as you recall that dusty vial in the monastery scriptorium and wonder if hospital staff ever complained to HR about their coworkers' bedside manner. Historians still argue whether mummy powder's apparent efficacy stemmed from its antiseptic dust or simply the compression of a fresh bandage. As you navigate past a cluster of coughing patients, someone coughs right into your face, a sneezing fit preceded by what could only be described as the world's first medieval foghorn. You step back, nearly stumbling over a small wooden chest labeled Plague Remedies. Inside are vials of vinegar-burdened herbs and wrung sponge sachets, meant to trap miasma. You poke at a dangling pouch of putrid sea salt and recall that some wards suspended live canaries above the bedside to detect toxic air. If the bird keels over, it open a window. Fringe or genius, the canary saved at least a few breaths of fresh air. Across the hall, 2 novice nurses fuss over a man writhing with kidney stones. They crush henbane seeds into a paste, recalling that poisoning the pain sometimes seemed easier than letting it run its course. You mutter a second, light joke. If only modern anesthesia came with chicken feathers and a side of hallucinations. Yet you note that certain plant alkaloids did offer genuine relief, even if overdose risk lurked in every pinch. A child lies on a pallet beside his dying mother, both swaddled in hospital-issue coarse wool. A gray-haired healer bends over them, blowing smoke from an herb bundle, lavender and larks, believing the fragrance could soothe fevered brains. This basilisk doodle of a practice blends sensory comfort with superstition. You can't help but smell a faint sweetness underneath the rot. Mainstream sources document that aromatic therapy had real calming effects, even if the sweet fumes didn't ward off plague. You stop by an infirmary, well-aware pilgrims and patients gather water from a trough lined with copper tubing. Some believed copper's metallic bite would purify water, another mainstream precaution against impurities. Others dropped in a pinch of red lead, convinced the color's vibrancy reflected its potency against humors. You suppress a grin. A red lead latte might warm your veins, but probably not in a good way. Historians still argue whether metal-lined conduits genuinely curbed contamination or introduced new toxins. A sudden hiss echoes as a scullery maid scrubs blood-stained bandages in a wooden vat. Steam rises like ghostly curtains, and you think there's your medieval hot tub of choice. She tosses the stained rags aside and pulls out a fresh stack scattered with flower petals. Hospitals sometimes laid petals on beds to mask stenches, an early form of ambient scent marketing. A third light joke teasing your lips. Medieval hospitality, where rose petals double as pillow mints. Moving deeper, you spy a small chamber labeled contemplation, reserved for those on death's threshold. The room is draped in heavy cloth and scented with frankincense. A dying man whispers the name of a saint, clasping a wooden cross until his knuckles whiten. You realize hospital care began and ended with spiritual comfort as much as physical treatment. Mainstream hospitals frequently partnered with religious orders, Augustinians and Knights, hospital entrusting souls equally to scripture and salve. At the end of the ward, Grizzled surgeon inspects a patient's ulcer through a keyhole in his viscera-crude protoendoscopy. He whispers instructions for a decoction of chicken, bile, and vinegar, asserting it would dissolve necrotic flesh. It's another fringe remedy that makes you glad for antiseptic dressings instead of pickled organ extracts. Yet, he's methodical. He measures doses, records responses, and revises his mixtures like a modern pharmacopoeia in slow motion. Historians still argue whether such protoclinical observations anticipated later evidence-based medicine or remained mired in superstition. You cross a threshold into the pediatric wing, if you can call it that, a room where orphans and sickly children share benches, their faces streaked with tears and dust. A woman kneels beside a boy with scrophulobtuberculosis of the lymph nodes and pours melted butter with roux into his mouth, clamping his jaw to force him through the searing bitterness. You shudder and recall the pennyroyal compress on that laboring mother. Medieval hospital cuisine and care often tested fortitude more than physiology, stepping over puddles of spilled gruel. You finally find a quiet nook by a shuttered window. The outside sky is a sliver of gray dawn, as cold as the stone below your feet. You lean back against the wall, heart pounding from the raw intimacy of so much suffering. Ragged moans echo down the corridor like a sorrowful choiran ASMR for the damned. Yet a soft realization warms you. Despite the stench and the risk of overcrowding, these wards saved lives. Pilgrims, lepers, battered peasants found a place to lie, to breathe, and to rest under vigilant eyes. You notice a battered ledger sewn into a leather cover hanging by the door, listing donations and patient names. Each entry is a prayer to charity gifts of bread, cloth, or coin that kept the hospital hearths lit. This ledger itself is a mainstream, a testament to medieval philanthropy as medicine. Behind it, you recall that monastery scriptorium copying herbals, the barber surgeon brandishing lancets, and the leech clinic dripping vinegar. All these efforts wove a tapestry of Karim perfect, sometimes grotesque, but anchored in human compassion. Rising from your nook, you brush lint from your robes and tuck your vial of stardew into your cloak. You snatch a sprig of rue from a bedside table and herbal ward warding pests, more than patient sand slided into your pouch. As you exit through the heavy door, the cold nose of dawn greets you again. A final light joke crosses your mind. Medieval hospitals offered no Wi-Fi, but at least they delivered unlimited empathy. You step back into the chilled street, lungs clearing from hospital air. The road ahead flickers with torchlight and prayers, leading toward the Renaissance scholars challenging dogma and the guild disputes of physicians versus surgeons. But for now, you carry the echoes of coughing wards and candlelit compassion. Reminder that sometimes hope outweighed squalor and that healing, even at its grimiest, was still a gift. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitals laid the bedrock of modern patient care or merely postponed inevitable fates. But you? No, you've witnessed the raw, relentless heart of charity medicine. You step out of the hospital doors into the crisp dawn, the promise of change riding on cool breezes swirling through narrow lanes. Ahead, you see the facade of a newly established printing workshop, its wooden sign swinging above drawers of fresh typefaces, letters stamped from metal rather than inked by laborious scribes. This is the dawn of the Renaissance, where medieval mysteries meet humanist curiosity, and scholars wield quills and presses to challenge ancient dogma. Mainstream records show that Gutenberg's movable type appeared around 1450, unleashing a flood of medical texts from Galen's Galenic humors to new treatises by Vesalius Sin to eager hands, drawn by the rhythmic clack of type bars. You slip inside the dimly lit workshop. Piles of freshly printed folios crowd wooden tables, each sheet warm to the touch. its black letters crisp against creamy paper. You inhale the tang of ink and sawdust, wondering if modern offices ever smelled so promising. A light joke crosses your mind. If only your printer at home could smell this noble instead of burning plastic. Among the leaflets, you spot Andreas Vesalius's De Humani Corporis Fabricatis, woodcut illustrations shattering Galen's animal-based anatomy with human cadaver precision. Historians still argue whether Vesalius's challenge truly dethroned Galenic authority overnight or simply nudged it into minor revisions, leaving the press. You wander into a nearby piazza where a marble statue of Hippocrates stands, guard over a bustling agora of scholars and apothecaries. You overhear heated debate in Latin. One lecturer denounces old leechcraft, while another extols Paracelsus's new spagyric mixtures that blend chemical metals with herbal essences. K. Paracelsus, a fringe figure, even then, purportedly swallowed mercury to prove its safety, claiming that the dose makes the poison. It's a wild anecdote that borders on performance art, hardly a recommended wellness retreat by today's standards. A bell chimes for the public anatomy demonstration, and you join a crowd gathered around a raised scaffold. The air crackles with anticipation as a robed professor unveils a human skull, its sutures etched in meticulous detail. This spectacle was once forbidden under medieval taboo, but now the crowd gasps, not in horror, but in reverent awe. Vesalius himself stands beside the scaffold, scalpels at the ready, correcting Galen's errors on the spot. You lean forward, feeling the rough-hewn wood under your palms. A light joke flitters through your mind. This beats binge-watching medical dramas. Minus the commercial breaks. Behind the lecture, scholars pore over marine fossils unearthed in alpine quarries, debating whether they're mere sports of nature or clues to a lost flood. Some assert the Earth's history spans centuries, not just the biblical thousands. This natural philosophy blends fringe curiosity like giant sea serpent sightings with nascent geology. You recall that medieval astrologers star dew and wonder if the sky holds more answers than the rocks beneath your feet. Yet you can't help but smile at the idea of Earth as a giant seashell hard to swallow without a glass of starstone dust. The mosaic of Renaissance Florence beckons you next. Stone streets lined with palazzi, whispering of Medici patronage. You follow the scent of wet marble and citrus trees into a sunlit courtyard, where a young scholar reads from a Greek manuscript. He traces letters with a stylus, breathing new life into Hippocratic aphorisms. Mainstream fact. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 brought Greek emigres and medical texts to Italy, fueling a revival of classical sources and igniting debates over translation accuracy. Historians still argue whether these revived Greek works restored medical practice or merely reintroduced outdated theories. A breeze shifts the pages of a battered codex lying open on a lectern. It details a fringe remedy recommended by Thessalian healers, sleeping in an oxhide pouch under the full moon to align one's humors. You chuckle, picturing yourself waddling through town in a bovine onesie, definitely not a Renaissance fashion. Statement. Yet such talismans persisted among rural folk, far from university disputations. A reminder that popular practice often lagged behind scholarly. Proclamations. You enter a candlelit hall dominated by a vast mural of classical deities, blended with Christian iconography, Apollo hovering above a kneeling virgin saint. Beneath, formulas for distillation glimmer on vellum records of Paracelsian laboratories experimenting with mineral salts, vitriol, and sulfuric vapors. The flick of a candle makes the inks gleam like embers, stirring a cozy curiosity. A light joke hums. Nothing says cutting-edge science like boiling brimstone in your kitchen. Still, Paracelsus's emphasis on chemical remedies sowed seeds for modern pharmacology. Acadi, even as conservative physicians decried him as amountebank. Your footsteps echo on patterned tiles. Coita, as you find a circle of scholars engaged in vivisection. Debates. They argue passionately over whether humane animal experiments can substitute for human subjects. Some propose using waterfowl to study pulmonary function. Others demand the Church's blessing for human trials. It's a crossroads where ethicists, priests, and natural philosophers collide in embryonic peer review in motion. Historians still argue whether these debates fostered a culture of ethical research or simply postponed harder questions behind moral rhetoric. Cart rumbles by bearing barrels of aqua regia, nitric acid, distilled from king's metal. Rumors claim it dissolves gold and even human hair on contact. You wrinkle your nose at the thought of nobility using acid to polish coronets or uninvited hairs. Yet this potent liquid illustrates Renaissance alchemy's dual role as both protochemistry and theatrical spectacle. Fringe alchemists dazzled patrons with transmutation shows even as they pursued genuine remedies for wounds and plagues. In a quiet library alcove, you find a scholar annotating a newly translated herbal. Dioscorides updated with notes on New World plants like sassafras and cinchona bark. The mention of quinine to those centuries away from understanding its anti-malarial properties hues in future breakthroughs. You trace inked marginalia, celebrating this Jesuit's bark as a panacea for fevers. Decades before Europeans grasped the curing power locked within its husk. This serendipitous encounter between Renaissance exploration and medieval tinctures hints at medicine's unfolding tapestry. Historians still argue whether the promise of New World pharmacopoeia outweighed the risks of untested imports. As twilight drapes the city in ruby hues, you climb a narrow gallery overlooking craftsmen forging surgical instruments from fine steel. Lancets, forceps, and bone saws glint under lantern-light tools so precise they betray medieval barbers' crude razors. A master smith polishes a set of aneurysm needles, marveling at their craftsmanship. You muse that tomorrow's surgeons will thank these artisans for marrying metallurgy with medical ambition. It's a quiet callback to the barber-surgeon's pole. It's now refined into a symphony of surgical precision. You pause at an open window, inhaling the mingled scents of ink, citrus blossom, and burning olive oil. Below, torchlit statues of Shakespearean actors in Elizabethan London recite lines about the still-vexed Bermouths, hinting that the East-West medical exchange continues to ripple through culture. A soft realization warms your chest. The Renaissance didn't eradicate medieval medicine overnight. It absorbed, critiqued, and repackaged it into a new framework of inquiry. Yet lingering superstitions, mandrake charms, starstones, and powder of sympathy continued to thread through popular practice long after scholars declared them passe. You tuck your mandrake sketch and quinine note into your satchel, feeling the weight of history's turning pages. The promise of experimental science glimmers like liquid mercury in candlelight, but so does the shadow of centuries-old lore. As you step back into the night air, the arc lights of progress and tradition swirl overhead, stars guiding every ambitious heel on stone streets. You trudge onward toward the next battleground of medicine, the gilded halls where physicians and surgeons spar for authority, shaping professional hierarchies that will endure for centuries. But tonight, you carry the print shop's warmth, the alchemist's fumes, and the scholar's fervor. The Renaissance has whispered its challenge to medieval practices, yet the echoes of toad powders and bloodletting still cling to the world like stubborn cobwebs. You slip into a dimly lit guild hall, where rows of wooden benches flank a raised dais draped in crimson velvet. The scent of heated beeswax candles mingles with stale chalk dust and the faint metallic temps of blood-washed stone. Tonight, you witness the ongoing struggle between physicians' robes, trailing quills, and Latin tomes and surgeons' aprons, stained with cautery scars and scraped leather gloves as they jockey for respect, its power, and the right to define healing itself. A low murmur rises to a hush as the master of the College of Physicians steps forward. His robes bear the embroidered emblem of Hippocrates' serpent wound staff, reminder that in 1518, Thomas Lineker and his peers secured a royal charter from Henry VIII to found the Royal College of Physicians, granting them authority to license medical practice within London's walls. It's a mainstream historical fact that marked a turning point. Physicians could now censure unlicensed practitioners and levy fines for illicit bloodletting. You shift on the rough bench, noticing the cold smear of crocodile dung still in your left. Satchel's Pukita, quirky souvenir you swore you'd never show at a guild meeting, lest they mistake you for a plague doctor. Yet it's a potent callback, once mere fringe oddity, now a symbol of every healer's scramble for legitimacy. As the master clears his throat, you feel the weight of centuries-old rivalry hinge on his next words. Across the hall, blades glint on a surgeon's belt. Surgeons, once barber apprentices who mastered the art of lancing and amputations, have long chafed under physicians' disdain. You recall that striped barber pullet's red and white swirl, once signifying both haircuts, and phlebotomy, and imagine those same poles bristling outside guild halls as barbers and surgeons clashed. A surgeon in scuffed boots leans forward, arms folded. His leather gloves stiffened by cautery soot. The master's voice rises. Only those schooled in the humoral texts may claim authority over disease. A ripple of dissent courses through the room. A surgeon stands, voice rough as scraped bone. He brandishes a lancet case, and what of hands skilled in flesh? Who tended the battlefield wounds when physicians debated theories? Historians still argue whether surgical practice saved more lives than scholarly prescriptions left to gather dust. His jab lands like a blade half challenge, half confession. A clerk rolls out a parchment scroll, listing fines for surgeons who failed to register their instruments by Midsummer's Eve. You lean in, studying the fees. 20 shillings for an illicit hernia operation, 10 for unauthorized cupping. It's the kind of petty bureaucracy that sows resentment. You can't help but quip under your breath. Modern insurance claims. Look. Simple by comparison, the hall warms as a brazier's glow intensifies, sending sparks dancing across medieval pasted posters grafted to flagstone walls. Physicians, beware, declares one broadside, illustrated with a caricature of an owl wearing a mortarboard. Below it, a surgeon's snarl is captioned, "Scalpel greater than scroll." A light joke tugs at your lips. Medieval meme culture in all its glory. On the dais, a physician produces a thick folio minutes from last month's disputation. You peer at the faded ink, resolved that anatomy is the province of surgeons alone. It reads. Several names follow, including those of 5 barbers turned master surgeons. The document drips with academic gravity, as if the quibbles of mortal flesh could be settled by Latin clauses. You wonder if any soul ever healed by decree. A scuffed boot taps impatiently. Standing near a board inscribed with guild regulations, the chief surgeon raises his voice. "We demand equal voice in licensing," he proclaims. "Our craft is no mere appendage to your lofty texts." He pulls from his pocket a small wooden pestle and mortar. With a flourish, he taps the base thrice an unspoken signal that a fringe remedy demonstration will follow. The crowd leans in, intrigued despite themselves. He lifts a translucent vial containing a powder called Renault Sherry Cornu, pulveris. Pulverized rhino horn believed to staunch bleeding by inducing rapid blood coagulation. He sprinkles it over a superficial cut on his palm, the crimson droplets dancing across the skin before settling. The cut barely bleeds. The surgeons murmur approval, physicians blanch. A fringe tidbit, yet a dramatic showcase of empirical testing. Observance trumps theory. The chief surgeon declares. Historians still argue whether such demonstrations truly advanced surgical practice or served primarily as shows of power to sway guild politics. You feel the tension buzz like a live wire underfoot. On one side, the physicians clutch their vellum scrolls, mouths pinched in disapproval. On the other, the surgeons beam at the tangible result, an elderly barber surgeon. His gray hair tucked beneath a coif, rises to speak of the 1540 Barber Surgeons Company Charter, which merged surgeons and barbers under a single corporate body by royal decree. He recalls how this compromise forged unity, but also entrenched the notion that surgeons were second-class practitioners allowed to bleed and extract stones, barred from prescribing wine cork poultices or diagnostic consultations. You remember? The sweet sting of the mustard poultice on your chest, and imagine offering it by prescription, an act punishable by fine. The master of physicians. He narrows his eyes. He retorts. The healing arts rely on sound theory. Without Galenic humors, what guides the surgeon's cut? A student scribbles notes, ink pooling on parchment. You note the striking irony. Surgeons cut into humoral charts carved on walls. Yet they were denied a voice in interpreting them. The chief surgeon leans forward, voice low. Theory without practice is a song without a chorus. He taps the wooden bench with his lancet handle for emphasis, producing a staccato clang that echoes like a call to arms. A few physicians shift, glancing at each other. The hall's atmosphere simmers colliding confidence with cunning. You glance at the flickering sconces, their flames dancing like captives. A light joke nudges your mind. Who knew guild politics could rival any reality TV show? Still, beneath the barbs lies genuine debate. Should cutting flesh require the same credentials as debating Aristotelian logic? Historians still argue whether this division ultimately spurred specialization and improved outcomes, or simply created harmful silos. A young physician steps forward, slender fingers clutching a feathered quill. Let us propose a joint licensing board, 2 physicians, 2 surgeons, and a neutral clergyman. He lays his proposal on the dais, eyes shining with cautious hope. The physicians sit straighter. The surgeons exchange wary nods. It's a modest compromise, aimed at forging cooperation without surrendering authority. A deep rumble of approval rises from the surgeon's bench, tempered by a ripple of murmurs from the physicians. The master strokes his silvery beard, considering. You feel the hush press in, bracing for his verdict. He clears his throat and announces, "We will form the Collegium Medico-Chirurgicum on these terms, pending royal assent." A collective sigh of relief from both sides. You sense a fragile harmony stitching to crafts. Together, the learned and the practical, the quill and the scalpel. Yet you know the truce is tenuous, destined to wobble under future tensions like barber surgeons splitting again in the 18th century. Medicine's evolution, after all, thrives on friction. As the meeting adjourns, you step back into the night air. The cool breeze carries echoes of heated Latin, the rasp of gloves, and the faint memory of mustard and honey from that chest poultice. You tuck your crocodile dung, parchment, and rhino horn vial safely into your satchel. Artifacts of both healing lore and professional rivalry. A final joke surfaces. Next time you spill something, maybe call a physician and a surgeon both. Just to keep the peace, you trudge onward toward tonight's last pilgrimage tucked away. Apothecary still mixing extraordinary tinctures. Where the boundary between learned and practical blurs once more. But you carry with you the knowledge that medieval medicine was not a monolith, but a tapestry of debate, compromise, and the endless quest to harmonize words with wounds. You slip into the dim apothecary you last spotted beneath the Guildhall's torchlight. Its shelves now lined with gleaming glass bottles stamped with sterile labels instead of wax seals. The air is brisk with the hum of fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of isopropyl alcohol mingles with echoes of lavender sachets from centuries past. You wander past aisles of neatly arranged capsules and tinctures where once stood jars of crocodile dung and powdered rhino horn. Here, medieval medicine's legacy glimmers in modern pharmaceuticals. A lineage traced from monastic herbals to contemporary drugstores. A bead of condensation drips from a stainless steel IV stand as you watch a nurse attach a dripper. Ritual, echoing monastic care in sanitized form. Mainstream fact: modern intravenous therapies stem from 19th century experiments in fluid replacement. Building on medieval infusions of wine and vinegar into wounds. Do you recall that mustard plaster on your chest, imagining it replaced by measured saline solutions delivered through sterile tubing? Historians still argue whether medieval infusions taught early physicians the value of fluid balance or merely delayed adoption of antiseptic technique. You breeze past a poster celebrating Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine discovery in 1796. A milestone in preventive care that owes a nod to medieval quarantine's origins. The word itself, quarantine, harks back to 14th century Ragusa's 40-day isolation. Today, public health teams enforce modern quarantines with contact tracing apps and temperature screenings far cry from stuffing onions under your tunic. Yet the impulse to cordon off contagion remains unchanged. A testament to medieval communities wrestling with plague. A sleek glass case showcases artisanal leech therapy kits, marketed as boutique treatments for microcirculation in reconstructive surgery. You watch a technician handle velvet black Hirudo medicinalis, descendants of those cellar-dwelling leeches that once dripped in vinegar troughs. Fringe tidbit: maggot debridement therapy also survives, using sterilized fly larvae to clean necrotic wounds, an ironic callback to those desperate buckets of excrement salve. You can't help but smirk at leeches and maggots staging a medical comeback tour. Historians still argue whether reviving these animal-based therapies honors medieval ingenuity or indulges in retro novelty. Further along, pharmacist mixes a compound ointment in a mortar of polished porcelain, its surface flashing under LED lights. You drift back to that medieval herbalist tapping jars for echoes, lifting bezoar stones like primitive antidotes. Now, lab technicians weigh vanishingly small molecules by digital scale, dissolving them into vehicles approved by regulatory boards. Born from the very guild disputes you witnessed, surgeons and physicians now collaborate under unified licensure. Ecclesia Medicos Urgicum's distant ancestor, existing practice standards across professions. Your gaze falls on a display of over-the-counter herbal supplements bearing names like St. John's wort and willow bark extract. It's no coincidence that willow bark's source of salicylic acid became the blueprint for aspirin in the late 19th century. What once involved gnawing a twig now yields precise acetylsalicylic acid capsules. This straight trajectory from folk remedy to blockbuster drug underscores medieval herbal's empirical kernel masked by superstition. Yet, some critics deride supplements as little more than placebos. Historians still argue whether modern herbalism perpetuates medieval myth or simply offers complementary options in evidence-based care. You move to a corner where public health guidelines hang beside pandemic preparedness posters. They echo monastic infirmaries, blending of quarantine, prayer, and gruel. But with digital dashboards and sterile PPE replacing chanting brotherhood. A nurse restocks N95 masks, beaked predecessors, drawing a direct line from tallow candlelit wards to climate-controlled ICU suites. It's uncanny how medieval fears of miasma birthed protective gear still wielded centuries later. Across from you, a medical student practices suturing on synthetic skin, tracing patterns first explored in Renaissance vivisections that challenged Galenic animal analogies. The room smells of disinfectant and warm latex. You recall Fra Angelo's clandestine theater of death, feeling the same thrill at unveiling hidden structures. Mainstream fact: modern surgical education relies on cadaver labs, sterile rooms, and simulation far safer than dissecting executed criminals by candlelight. Yet the drive to see beneath flesh endures, spurred by curiosity older than universities. Final stop before you exit: a display of placebo-controlled trial charts. Graphs show control and treatment groups, statistical significance spelled out in crisp fonts. You think of those powdered skull teas and plague bouquets rituals that may have worked through expectation rather than chemistry. The placebo effect, now rigorously studied, was the unwitting heir to medieval charm-bound comforts. Historians still argue whether the power of suggestion was the true elixir behind many a folk remedy. You step through automatic doors into the night, satchel slung across your shoulder like a time traveler's pack. The streets glint with neon reflections instead of torchlight, yet the pulse of healing beats unchanged. You finger the little vial of leech oil souvenir tucked inside a playful relic bridging eras. Modern medicine, you realize, stands on medieval shoulders. Botanical wisdom, quarantine instincts, guild regulations. And even the occasional leech or maggot still crawls forward. As you walk beneath the city lights, you feel that same mixture of skepticism and wonder that guided you through that smoke-filled hut at journey's start. Medieval medicine didn't simply vanish, it transformed, leaving fingerprints on every syringe, pill, and placebo trial. And while antibiotics and antiseptics have revolutionized care, the echoes of whispered incantations, star charts, and poultices remind you that healing is as much art as science, as human as hope itself. Asterisk, now let your breathing slow as the city's clamor fades, each step softening against the pavement. Imagine the glow of a single candle, its flames steady and warm, guiding you through layers of time until the past and present melt into gentle darkness. Remember the hushed chants of cloistered monks, the hiss of cautery, and the quiet tug of a leech's embrace. The dusty rustle of parchment and the clinical click of an IV dripple, threads in the tapestry of care that binds us across centuries. Feel the weight of worry lifting from your shoulders, replaced by the calm assurance that humanity's quest to heal never stops. From mandrake root to microscopes, from whispered prayers to placebo pills, each innovation emerges from both wonder and necessity. Embrace the notion that you carry both cynic and believer in your heart, that healthy doubt and hopeful faith are companions on every path to recovery. As your eyelids grow heavy, envision the gentle scent of rosewater caressing your senses. A final nod to quiet remedies that soothed generations. Let your mind drift over empty wards where candles once flickered, now silent, but for the echo of compassion. With each exhale, release the fear of the unknown. With each inhale, invite serene curiosity to fill the space soon. You'll sink into sleep, cradled by centuries of collective care, the guardians who stitched wounds, quelled fevers, and fashioned placebos of chalk and beetle shells. Tonight, rest in the knowledge that healing story is your story, woven through time by hands, hearts, and hopes as ancient as humanity itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.